Give me 17 players better than Jayson Tatum right now.
Okay. LeBron, Giannis, Durant, Luka, Jokic, Embiid, Steph, Kawhi, Anthony Davis, Dame. We're at 10. James Harden is 11. And now is here where it gets trickier. I think Donovan Mitchell, I think Devin Booker have shown where they are. I think Ja is better than him. Chris Paul, I haven't mentioned. Now we're at 15. Paul George puts us at 16. Jimmy Butler puts us at 17. And Jayson Tatum's 18.
Over the past few seasons, we've seen Jayson Tatum take tremendous strides, going from a timid role player to a proven playoff performer, and eventually a number one option on a championship caliber team. And right now for Jayson Tatum, he's really the borderline for being a superstar and a non-superstar. As depending on what night you see him, he can be a top 5 player or even barely a top 15 player. Now, with that being said, our good friend Nick Wright had an absurd take saying Tatum is not even top 17. So in the following couple of minutes, I'm going to debunk Nick's claims, absolutely expose him, and give JT the respect he deserves. And looking at our first player compared to Tatum, we have Jimmy Butler. And these two guys right here, they're both number one options on really good Eastern Conference teams. They play both ends of the floor, and personally, I'm a big fan of Jimmy and have much respect for him. And comparing their last 2 seasons, including this year, Tatum's averaging 27 points, 8 boards, 4 assists on very impressive shooting splits. Compared to Butler, he's averaging 22 points, 6 boards, 5 assists on also pretty good splits.
Oh yeah, Jimmy played pretty good.
And for both these guys' teams, their overall records are eerily similar. The Heat winning 55 games, and the Celtics winning 54. When talking about impact on winning, both these guys' impact is up there with the best players in the league. And if you really want to nitpick who is the better overall player, looking at scoring, defense, playmaking, I think Tatum last year's conference finals proved he is better than Jimmy. Albeit not by much, I think he proved it. As looking at the entire series, Tatum was more consistent, and in Game 7 got the W on Jimmy's home floor. And looking at our next player, we have Paul George, also a great two-way player. And comparing him versus Tatum, I think PG is the best player comparison for JT. And from an all-time perspective, looking at PG back in 2019, I think that version was the best version of George. But fast forward to present day, comparing both these players, Tatum right now definitely has the edge. As when it comes to George, over the last 2 years, he's only played 35 total games. And if you look at the overall numbers, he has not been superstar Paul George. And when he actually plays, the Clippers have a very mediocre 20-15 record that does not even come close to Tatum on the Celtics. And I do want to throw one more thing in there. Since 2016, Paul George has made 1 conference finals and 0 finals appearances. Compared to Tatum, who isn't even 25, who's made 3 conference finals, including 1 finals berth. Looking at both these players in the moment, JT, he's the better scorer, the better passer, he's more efficient, and above all else, he's healthy and available for his team. Now, skipping ahead to our next player, we have Ja Morant, who once again Nick said was better than Tatum. And comparing these two players, they're both ascending superstars who are on the border of being top 10 players. And looking at Ja and Tatum's last 2 seasons, both these guys are around 27 or 28 points per game. And offensively speaking, I would say Tatum and Ja 100% are in the same tier. And you could very easily argue Ja Morant offensively is better than Tatum. Now, where you lose me on saying Ja's better is looking at the defensive end of the court, as Tatum's impact on that end far surpasses Ja. And looking at last year's playoffs, when it came to playing defense, Tatum was guarding KD, Jimmy Butler, Andrew Wiggins, some real all-star talent. For Ja Morant, he was put in the corner on the worst offensive player, and that was none more evident versus Minnesota, where he's guarding Patrick Beverley and playing Olay defense.
To go. Beverley, the drive, stops, pirouettes, and scores. And he just claimed that Memphis is too small to guard him.
One more thing I do want to add, looking at overall value, last year without Ja Morant, the Grizzlies went 21-7, including beating the Warriors in the playoffs by nearly 40 points. Boston without Tatum is not doing that, as once again his two-way impact is much higher than Ja. And sticking at the point guard, next up, we have CP3 versus Tatum. And look, I'm not going to spend much time on this. CP is a Hall of Famer, he's had his day, and in his prime was the best point guard in the league. But now being 37 going on 38, I'm sorry, compared to Tatum, he's not holding up. And looking at last year's playoffs, versus Dallas, he was extremely mortal. In the final 4 games of that series, only averaging 9 points, 6 assists, 3 boards, with a plus-minus of a -49. I know Tatum had his bumps and bruises in the finals, but for an entire series, he was not as bad as Chris Paul versus the Dallas Mavericks. Now, staying in Phoenix, we have Booker versus Tatum. And much like Ja versus Tatum, this one is a really tough call, as both these guys are elite shot makers, good playmakers, and play underrated defense on championship caliber teams who have made the finals. And if you want to look at last year in particular, when it came to the NBA playoffs, their overall stats were eerily similar. Both in the mid-20s when it came to scoring, averaging 5 or 7 assists, and a couple of boards. And evaluating these guys as individual players, yes, Booker, he is more efficient, but when it comes to Tatum, he's a much better passer and playmaker, and for Boston, he is asked to do more on both ends of the floor. As looking at their finals run, he led his team in points, assists, steals, and threes made. And much like CP versus Dallas, Booker in the second half of that series was absolutely dreadful, barely even cracking 20 points in any game. And looking past Devin Booker, next up, we have another elite shooting guard, that being Donovan Mitchell. Now, comparing both these players, you have 2 guys who you want with the ball at the end of the game, as quite frankly, they are both proven playoff performers. Now, the one thing I'll say about Donovan and his playoff resume, when he's the leader of a team and their primary ball handler, his Jazz squads had very little, if any, playoff success. Looking back at the NBA bubble in 2020, in the first round, they blew a 3-1 lead versus the Denver Nuggets. In 2021 versus the LA Clippers, they blew a 2-0 lead, and last year versus Dallas, lost in 6, with Luka missing 3 games. And the one thing I do want to harp on is the defensive end of the court. As versus Dallas, Donovan Mitchell was completely embarrassing.
The paint, hard screen from Kleba. Dinwiddie gets right around Mitchell like he wasn't even there.
He was borderline James Harden-esque with a lack of defense and commitment on that end of the floor. Yes, he got his offensive stats, but defense also matters, and when evaluating players, Tatum more times than not beats these guys on that end of the floor. Now, speaking of Harden-level defense, one of the 17 players Nick had over Tatum was indeed James Harden. Now, when it comes to Harden, I think for the most part, we are stuck in the past when it comes to evaluating as well as ranking him. As looking at him in Philly, he's still very ISO heavy, he's ball dominant, and really does not make his teammates better. Yes, he'll have some games where he drops 30 points, looks like 2019 Harden. But more times than that, he'll have these weird, odd games where he has 12 points on 5 of 17 shooting. My point being, when you look at a superstar player or a top 10 player, you need consistency as well as playoff success. And lastly for James Harden, versus the Heat, it was the same old story. Averaging 18 points, 7 assists, 6 boards, on 41% shooting with 5 turnovers. And looking at the last 2 games of that series, he had 14 points and 11. When talking about a superstar player, they do not do that in a big-time pivotal moment. And stack those numbers up versus Tatum versus that same Heat team, and it's not even comparable, as JT averaged 25, 8, and 6 on 46% shooting. When talking about playoff James Harden, he's always been suspect, but now at age 33, he's slower, he's fatter, and even more inconsistent compared to Jayson Tatum. And looking at our next comparison, I'm going to do 2 at once, that being Dame Lillard as well as Anthony Davis. as I think both these guys are in pretty similar spots, as AD over the past 3 years has played a total of only 80 games. And the thing is, he's not only not healthy, when he is healthy and playing, he's a pitiful player, shooting 15% on jump shots and 22% on threes. And looking at his overall production, he is not Anthony Davis from the 2020 bubble, and frankly that guy is never coming back. Now looking at Dame Lillard, much like AD, he's been banged up each of the last 3 years, only playing a total of 101 games. Now unlike Davis, I think Lillard can get back to that superstar form. And comparing Dame versus Tatum, at this point, you could say Dame is still better, and at the end of the year, you might be right. But talking about in the moment, looking at which player is healthy and more consistent in the playoffs, that is undoubtedly Jayson Tatum. And much like Ja Morant, when you compare Tatum to Dame, the defensive end is a wide margin. And compared to Anthony Davis, offensively, Tatum runs circles around this current version of AD. The bottom line being, you can't rank two guys who are always hurt over a guy who's healthy and makes deep playoff runs on the regular. Now, our last player Nick said was better than Tatum was indeed Kawhi Leonard. And for Kawhi at this point compared to Tatum, it's really hard to rank him over him, as undoubtedly when he's healthy, he's a top 10 player and a borderline top 6 or top 5. The only problem is, he is rarely, if ever, healthy. And at this point, I don't know if Kawhi ever again is playing a back-to-back.
No, I don't really feel like it.
Looking at 2019 Kawhi Leonard, that guy was a superstar and the best player in the world. 2022 Kawhi, he's hurt, and I have no idea who he is at this point. So much like AD and Dame Lillard, I'm going to put Kawhi behind Tatum due to injuries and not being healthy. As once again, JT at this point has never had a major injury and in the playoffs is always available. So with that last point being made, that is the end of the video. As always, thank you guys for watching, hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you guys next time.